Making games is the business of making play, but the job itself is not play. Okay, I really want you to let that quote sink in for a second. When we consume entertainment, when we grab a controller and completely lose ourselves in a virtual world, it feels entirely effortless. It's fun. So it's supernatural to just assume the people building these worlds are, well, having fun all day, right? Wrong. Actually, the reality of crafting those experiences is this intensely rigorous, totally uncompromising professional discipline. Today, we are cracking open the playbook of one of the gaming industry's absolute masters to see exactly how the sausage is made.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating philosophy of a legendary game director. And we aren't just talking about coding or drawing pixels here. We're really getting into the psychology of creativity, the harsh realities of teamwork, and those invisible mechanics that make a game actually fun to play. So if you want to understand how master-level creators really operate behind closed doors, you are in exactly the right place.
We'll be taking an inside-out journey today, moving through 4 key phases. First, the creator's mindset. Second, studio dynamics. Third, the mechanics of fun. And finally, the player's reality. Let's kick things right off with phase 1, the creator's mindset. This phase is all about the internal engine that drives a true professional, and that starts with this concept of internal pressure. The sheer speed and drive required to survive in this industry mean you can't just sit around waiting for inspiration to strike. You kind of have to force it into existence. The source material uses this brilliant analogy. Think of your new idea like blowing up a balloon. When you first get a killer concept for a project, your immediate instinct is to run out and tell everyone, right? You want to tweet about it, you want to text your friends. But the argument here is that by doing that, you're literally letting the air out of the balloon. You lose your momentum. Instead, you've got to hold that idea inside. Let it build heat. Let the pressure build up so intensely that you have absolutely no choice but to channel all that explosive energy directly into your actual work. So, once you've built up all that internal pressure and you're finally ready to share it, I've got a question for you. How do you actually pitch an idea? Think about it for a second. If you're standing in front of your team or investors, are you handing them a 100-page document? Are you going to give a 2-hour lecture explaining every tiny, exhausting piece of lore and mechanics? No way. The answer is speed. The source material is completely adamant about this. When you're presenting, you have got to cut the fat. Honestly, no one cares about your long, drawn-out intentions. It's all about pacing. You want high density, high impact, and super fast delivery. Hit them with the core visual, drop a couple of punchy lines, and move on. Keep the energy up and keep your audience completely hooked. But what happens when you sit down to work and crickets? Developer's block. It happens to everyone. Luckily, there's a strict formula here to destroy it. First, define the problem simply. Never start from a totally blank page. Give yourself a specific constraint. Second, broaden your thinking. Cast a massive net for wild, out-of-the-box ideas. Third, prioritize volume over perfection. Just generate a mountain of concepts without judging a single one of them. And fourth, just do it already. Action generates motivation, not the other way around. If you sit around waiting until you feel motivated, you're going to be waiting forever. Start moving your hands and your brain will catch up. That perfectly sets us up for phase 2, studio dynamics. See, no matter how brilliant your internal mindset is, modern entertainment is almost never created in a vacuum. You have to take all that intense, disciplined energy and merge it with a massive team of artists, programmers, and producers. And the rules of engagement here, they totally shatter a huge industry myth. We tend to view famous game directors as these untouchable kings, just handing down orders from a throne. But the source material explicitly rejects that. The director is not king, the customer is king. The real hierarchy doesn't flow downward from the creator, it flows upward from the player. The director is really just the person begging their team to help them build something the customer will actually want to buy. But since you're working with this huge team of talented people, it raises a really tricky question. When there's a massive disagreement on the design, how do you settle it? Do you put it to a vote? Should the majority rule when making creative decisions? The answer is a resounding no. The text is incredibly direct about this. Majority rule creates mediocre, safe, and ultimately boring games. And why is that? Because truly innovative ideas usually sound terrible on paper. There's this fantastic anecdote in the source about Metal Gear Solid 3. The director proposed this really complex system where players had to heal their own physical injuries in the game menus. Only 4 people on the entire team thought it was a good idea. If they had taken a vote right there, it would have been cut instantly.
but it went on to become one of the most beloved mechanics in the game. The director has to be a lighthouse, holding totally firm to a singular vision even when the majority just doesn't see it yet. Now, holding firmly to your vision does not mean being a jerk. You have to remember this golden rule. The industry is smaller than you think. Never get into fights. This is just the practical reality of professional life. The people you argue with today could literally be your bosses tomorrow. Leaving a trail of messes and burned bridges will absolutely tank your career. So you need to be uncompromising on the game's vision, for sure, but entirely collaborative and respectful with the human beings actually making it.
Moving right along to Phase 3, the mechanics of fun.
We've talked about how to work, but now we need to look at what we're actually building. How do you construct fun? It's such an abstract concept, right? But the source material breaks it down into this highly logical, almost mathematical philosophy. The absolutely crucial point is understanding game essence, which is the balance between risk and return. Think about the classic arcade game Space Invaders. If you just hide behind your shields, you have zero risk of dying, but also zero return because you can't hit the aliens. To actually guarantee a hit, you have to move out from cover and get dangerously close to the enemy's line of fire. You dramatically increase your risk of dying, but you gain the massive return of landing your shot. That specific tension, that is the literal essence of play. To really ground this philosophy, let's look at two iconic micro-case studies. In Super Mario Bros., jumping right next to an enemy's head is a massive risk. I mean, 1 pixel off and you die, but the return is eliminating the threat entirely. Or look at fighting games, like the famous Shoryuken input. To execute it, you literally have to drop your block and press forward, walking directly into danger. The risk is completely exposing yourself to a devastating combo. The return is unleashing an invincible uppercut. The closer the risk and the return are tied together, the more thrilling the game becomes. This dynamic creates what's called the squeeze and release loop, which is a 3-step cycle. Step 1, apply stress. Step 2, allow action. Step 3, provide release. On paper, that sounds kind of crazy. Why would you ever want to stress out your audience when they're just playing games to relax? But the text explains that without that initial squeeze of stress, like a tough enemy or a crazy difficult jump, there can be no real feeling of triumph. The joy of victory is literally just the psychological release of the stress the game just forced onto you. And this brilliant concept dictates how you structure that stress over time. Imagine your game's difficulty like climbing a mountain. If the challenge is just a perfectly straight, diagonal line going up, it becomes an exhausting, totally boring grind. You need spikes. These are your intense boss fights where the stress is maxed out. But, just as importantly, you need valleys. You need these moments of rest, flat terrain, and quiet exploration where the player can actually enjoy their newfound power before they hit the next big spike. Pacing is absolutely everything here. And that brings us to our final stop, Phase 4, the player's reality. Everything we've discussed so far, the internal pressure, the studio arguments, the risk-return mechanics, it all funnels down into a screen sitting in someone's living room. And the harsh truth of this final phase is incredibly simple. Try telling the player your excuses. Ouch, right? But it's so true. When a player hits a game-breaking bug or plays a badly balanced level, they do not care that your lead programmer quit halfway through the project. They do not care that your budget got slashed. They don't care about your hardware limitations. As the text aggressively reminds us, the player's convenience and enjoyment are the only things that matter. You cannot attach an apology note to a finished product. Because of that brutal reality, you have to perfect the moment-to-moment experience, putting the player's psychology way above the developer's convenience. And practically, this means 3 things. Make retries instantly quick, keep loading times short, and return control immediately. The source material notes something really interesting. High difficulty doesn't actually make players quit. Dead time makes players quit. If someone fails a level, and then they have to sit through a 10-second loading screen staring at a game over graphic, their motivation evaporates. You have got to get that controller back into their virtual hands instantly to keep them locked in to that flow state. As we wrap up this explainer, consider this final profound reality from the source material, the developer's hardship versus the game itself. The author shares this deeply personal realization. The grueling late nights, the fights over design, the agonizing, stomach-churning stress of development, all of that fades away. Human memory naturally forgets the pain over time. But the game itself, it endures. The author talks about a tiny visual flash mistake in an old Kirby game that still haunts him decades later, because that art is permanent. It's going to be played by millions of people, potentially outlasting the creators themselves. The pain is temporary, but the legacy is forever. Which leaves us with one final thought to reflect on today. Are you ready to endure the hardship to create something that actually lasts? Because that is the real business of making play. It takes relentless speed, an unyielding vision, and a totally ironclad grasp of the mechanics of fun to build something truly timeless. We hope this breakdown of a master's philosophy has given you the focused insights you need to fuel your own creative journey. Until next time, keep building.